Well, hello there, Jason D'Souza coming to you from a rainy Tokyo. It's cherry blossom season here. You can see some in the background there. Probably about a week off from them really blooming in full. And I thought it'd be a good opportunity to provide a bit of an update about what's happening here in Japan. So Prime Minister Takeichi recently won a commanding election victory where she now has a significant majority in the lower house of the Japanese parliament. What that has done is provided her and her government with a lot of confidence in how to approach Japanese growth and Japanese economic recovery. And that's a big change from the governments of Prime Minister Kashiba and Ishiba before that, which were minority administrations, which really hampered the confidence of the government in being able to do things. I think one of the fascinating statistics is that under 30s in Japan voted overwhelmingly for Prime Minister Takeichi, something like 80% of voters in that area, showing the sort of confidence that I think people had in her message for Japan. So since coming to office, I guess the number one challenge she's facing here is, like most countries, is on fuel. Unlike Australia, which apparently has not prepared itself properly with appropriate fuel supplies, Japan has some 250 days of fuel, petrol and diesel, to run its economy. And so it has now started to draw down on some of those reserves. A lot of its fuel comes through the Strait of Hormuz, so it is problematic for Japan that whole issue there is problematic for Japan, but they have sufficient fuel reserves. Apparently in our country we have something like 20 days or 22 days, and really that is an indictment upon our system of government in not preparing us properly for crises like this. We can talk about that perhaps in another video. What is more concerning for Japan is its gas supply. So it has about 3 weeks of gas, LNG. A lot of it again comes from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz. And for Japanese industry, this is the pressing concern. And so now you're seeing the government here make moves to try and do more deals with countries like Australia to ensure gas supply, to ensure its manufacturing. So I would say right now that's one of the primary issues that is facing the Japanese economy. Separately to that, since being re-elected to office, the Japanese Prime Minister has started to focus on what her economic plan for Japan will be. So in defense, a significant increase in defense spending, new focus on defense as a growth sector as opposed to a national security cost center, certainly new relationships with other countries to build new defense equipment, export of lethal weapons now authorized, and of course the change coming, one would think, to the constitution to allow Japan to move from a more pacifist arrangement to one that would allow forward defense if required. And I think that's important for Japan to sort of make that move now in a particularly uncertain world. More broadly on the economy, there is now some focus on 19 growth sectors, each with its own cabinet minister allocated to changing the Japanese economy. A real focus now on semiconductors, on AI, on self-made technology here in Japan, after a period of time of Japanese companies really starting to allow products in China and more broadly to do a lot of its manufacturing overseas, similar to the United States and similar to Australia, is now coming back into frame in terms of manufacturing in Japan. So a real focus there. I think one of the great stories isn't really told is of the Japanese credit situation. So we learn regularly and we hear regularly about the very high levels of Japanese public debt, some 240% of GDP, which has come from a whole range of QE over many, many years trying to stimulate the Japanese economy. And of course, that is highly problematic. However, Japan is also a significant creditor nation, and Japanese private households have a significant amount of savings, some $15 trillion. And so one of the things that the government is trying to do is to get Japanese savers to start investing some of that money into the market. And we're seeing that, of course, in Australia, where many, many Japanese companies are starting to look for good growth opportunities in the Australian market, not just in real estate and infrastructure, but in financial services, more broadly in agriculture, which I think is really interesting. And so, again, one of the reasons why I'm starting to visit a lot more often is that there is a real interest in Japan in building a strong relationship with Australia, because we remain a stable place to invest. We remain a place where there is regulatory certainty, and despite the predilection of governments to mess around with tax on foreign investors, which I will say unashamedly is hurtful to our country, there's still a strong belief in the Japanese community and other Asian markets too, but in this case Japanese community, of Australia being a very strong place to invest. So I think that's pretty exciting for us. We still in Australia have a strong growth story ahead of us, I think, but that will require a lot of international investors to really look at our market and see where those opportunities are. And I think for Australian companies, it's really telling that story of why we are a great place to invest, what the opportunities are, and what are the collaborative partnerships that can be built that can benefit both countries. And we have talked a little bit on our podcast about the fact that we're now seeing a group of countries start to group together to do things together. The Quad, again, India, the United States, and Australia and Japan really coming together, starting to share technology with one another, trying to figure out how to use the capabilities of each country to succeed more as a whole. Again, AUKUS, the defense relationship there, has a technology angle to it. Pillar 2 between the UK, the United States, and Australia. These are important relationships for our country. These are important relationships more broadly for the countries that we're in partnership with, because it forms an alliance of countries that have a shared interest of their own economic success, but also a broader regional interest in collective security of that group. Importantly, we have really seen multilateral institutions not perform well in this current period of time with geopolitics the way it is. And that is why we're starting to see these groupings coming together, speaking more often and talking more often together, which I think is a very valuable thing. One other thing I should talk about as well is the strength of the Japanese economy is starting to be reflected in its stock market. So the look overall, and Japan ETFs have done very, very well, in some cases outperforming the S&P last year, I think. That's reflective of the fact that people are starting to understand the Japanese growth story over the last few years, led by Berkshire Hathaway investing in some big Japanese trading houses, Mitsubishi Corp being one. I think money is starting to follow that as well. So international investment into Japan is starting to become really interesting. And just like we are looking in our country at Japanese investors looking to invest in our country, I think we should really be looking at a lot more interest from Australia into investing into the Japanese market. And certainly we're starting to see examples of that in some Australian companies going, you know what, there's something really special happening here in Japan and we should look at it more closely. Overall, I just wanted to give you a quick update of how things are going over here. It's great being here again. It is a wonderful country to visit. It's a wonderful country to do business with, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.